She was so beautiful that she stirred envy in the heavens and obsession among the gods. They said no one could look at Medusa for long, not out of fear, but out of fascination. Her long hair, her intense gaze, and her golden skin enchanted even the most brutal of creatures. But her beauty was no blessing. It was a curse. When the god of the seas, Poseidon, saw her, he desired her with divine fury. And inside Athena's sacred temple, he took her by force. Medusa's screams echoed through the marble columns. But the gods are deaf when the victim is mortal. And Athena, goddess of wisdom and war, does not forgive desecration, even when the one who bleeds is not the one to blame. The punishment was cruel. Not against the aggressor, but against the one who was attacked. Medusa was cursed. Her hair, once a symbol of beauty, became a nest of living serpents. Her skin, once radiant, turned scaly, almost stone. And her gaze gained the power of petrification. Anyone who dared look into her eyes would turn to stone, frozen in time in their final moment of terror. Banished from mortal society, condemned to wander through forgotten ruins. Medusa became what everyone feared, a monster. But she wasn't born that way. She was made. Forged by pain, shaped by abandonment, and consecrated as a symbol of feminine fear. For centuries, humanity told her story through the eyes of heroes, gods, and victors. But maybe now it's time to hear the voice of the silenced creature. To look at Medusa not with disgust but with empathy. Because her curse is more than magic, it's metaphor. Her petrifying gaze doesn't represent hatred but silenced pain. The terror we feel in front of what we don't understand. Or in front of the truth we'd rather bury. Today you'll hear the real story of the Gorgons. And maybe by the end you'll realize the monster was never her. But Medusa wasn't alone. She was part of an ancient trio, feared even by the gods, the Gorgons. 3 sisters born of primordial chaos, daughters of night and sea. Athena the strong, Euryale the screamer, and Medusa, the beautiful. They lived beyond the known world in a place forgotten by mortals. A desert of eternal stones where the wind whispers laments. And the eyes that open never close again. There among shadows and statues that were once flesh. They waited, watched, survived. Athena and Euryale were immortal, untouchable. But Medusa wasn't. She was the only one who could bleed. The only one who could die. That's why she was the target. She was the one the legend chose as its victim. And it was her name, and only hers, that history recorded. Medusa, the mortal Gorgon. The one whose gaze pierces the soul and turns hearts to stone. But did she want to be a monster? Or was she forced to become one? Before the serpents. Before the curse. Before the terror carved in stone. Medusa was just a woman. They say her beauty was as rare as the silence of the gods. A priestess in Athena's temple. She had sworn eternal chastity. She served the goddess with devotion, guarding the sacred as one guards their own heart. She was respected, admired, and to some desired. But on Olympus, beauty is a threat. And in a world built by gods, desire is a weapon. Poseidon, lord of the seas, saw her. And like a wave that asks no permission, he invaded the temple and took her. There between columns meant to protect her. There where she prayed for peace. And Athena, the one who should have protected women, turned her face away. Worse, she punished Medusa, as if she were to blame for her own pain. She transformed her body, condemned her soul, made her into a warning, a punishment carved into living flesh. Thus the monster was born, not from darkness, but from injustice. There was no compassion, no comfort. Athena's punishment struck like lightning, cold, divine, merciless. Medusa felt the change as one feels death. While still alive, her hair, once a source of pride, twisted in agony. Serpents rose where silk once flowed. They hissed, screamed, and wept with her. Her eyes, once gentle, became a curse, not by choice, but by decree. From that day on, anyone who looked at her froze, turned to stone, with the expression they wore in their final second. Fear, guilt, admiration, all petrified. The world called her a monster. But the real monster was invisible. It was the silence of the gods, the absence of justice. Exiled, hunted, Medusa wandered through forgotten lands, surrounded by statues that were once men, invaders, warriors, the curious, all punished by a gaze she never asked for. And there, in the solitude of her new form, she learned to survive, not as a woman, but as a threat. The gods, restless, watched from above. Medusa's name whispered like wind across the mortal realms. Her gaze? A living weapon. Her body? A threat that had to be silenced. And so came Perseus, son of Zeus, raised to fulfill destinies written by others, sent by a cowardly king who wished for her end, but disguised it as a quest for glory. "Bring me the head of the Gorgon," he said, as if asking for a trophy, as if she were a prize. A monster of legend, not a wounded soul. But Perseus didn't go alone. Athena, the same goddess who cursed Medusa, gave him the shield, polished like a mirror, so he'd never have to meet her eyes, because even the gods fear what they create. Hermes gave him the sword and the winged sandals, and invisible, flying above the desert of stone, he found Medusa sleeping. Yes, sleeping. She didn't fight, didn't attack. She was simply resting, like someone carrying too much for too long. And then, without warning, without honor, without a duel, Perseus decapitated her with a single strike. He took her head, and with it her story. But the legend was far from over. From the blood that poured from Medusa's neck, two impossible beings were born: Pegasus, the winged horse, and Chrysaor, the golden warrior, children of Poseidon, born not from love, but from pain, from the violence that transformed her, from the blade that silenced her. Even in death, Medusa still gave life. Even decapitated, her power did not fade. Her head, carried by Perseus, still turned all it saw into stone. She had become a weapon, a relic of destruction, a tool in the hands of heroes and gods, the very ones who allowed her downfall. Perseus used her head to defeat enemies, to save princesses, and to become legend. But in the end, it was Athena who claimed what remained. She embedded Medusa's image into her shield, not as a tribute, but as a symbol of power. As a warning, the Gorgon became an icon. The Gorgonian, her petrified face, began to adorn temples, shields, and armor. It was used to ward off evil, with the face of one the world had deemed evil. The truth? They didn't slay a monster. They stole her power. And even in death, Medusa remained untamed. They say Medusa was a monster. But what is a monster? One who destroys with their hands? Or one who chooses not to see another's pain? Medusa wasn't born dark. She was shaped that way. By violence. By silence. By unjust punishment. She was a priestess, a victim, a survivor. And in the end, a symbol of silence fury, of beauty punished, of the woman who, even in death, still haunts the gods. Perhaps the true terror of her story is not the gaze that turns to stone, but the world that forced her to close her eyes. And if this story moved you, if it made you see the other side of the myth, then you're ready to discover how many other truths lie hidden in the shadows of legend. Forgotten stories, silenced voices, truths long buried, and they're still out there, waiting to be heard. If this tale awakens something in you, imagine how many others are still waiting to be told. Forgotten stories, hidden legends, truths no one ever dared to speak. Walk this dark path with us. Discover what the gods never wanted you to know. Subscribe and keep exploring the myths through the eyes of those who dare to see beyond the legend.